You're live.
Good evening and welcome everyone to the fifth webinar in the Sephardic Mizrahi Jewish Speakers Series. I'm Ann Sampson from Congregation BINA. We would like to thank our supporting organizations, Congregation BINA, a community of Jews from India, Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, who sponsors these events with the Congregation BINA. We organize it together. Bet Raim Synagogue, the Lodzer Center Congregation, Kulanu Canada, Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, Jews Against Anti-Semitism Canada, and the United Grassroots Movement. Alan Herman of CIJR and I work closely together on securing speakers and making all the arrangements for these presentations. Thank you, Alan, for all that you do. But we could not possibly do it on our own. So we would like to acknowledge and thank Rajivan Veerasingham and Fleur Sampson of Congregation BINA for their invaluable technical assistance in getting this webinar to you all. Thanks also to Ariella Daniels for designing the flyer for us, and to Catherine Huselak for standing by just in case we run into difficulties with sharing the slides this evening. 2 weeks ago, I received an email from Jack Hoffman, who registered for this webinar, reminding me of a hidden chapter in Jewish history. At the end of the 15th century, I learned, the Spanish Inquisition forced many Jews to flee Spain. The most adventurous among them took to the high seas and became pirates. It is a chapter in Jewish history well worth reading about if you have not already done so. I assured him I would mention this today in my opening remarks to you all. This evening's presentation is being recorded and will be available in a week or two. Please check your junk or spam folder, as this email will come to you from Congregation BINA. Please make sure you enter your questions in the chat, and following the presentation, we will proceed with the Q&A session. This evening, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Rivka Campbell, our speaker on From the Inquisition to the Caribbean, the Jews of Jamaica. Rivka Campbell, a Jew of Jamaican descent, was born and raised in Toronto. She seeks to build community among Jews of color in Canada while opening dialogue among the mainstream Jewish community about the experiences of Jews of color. She is the co-founder of the group Jews of Color and the sole Canadian recipient of the first Union of Reform Judaism's Juvenation Fellowship. Rivka is a recognized speaker on Jewish diversity and has been interviewed by Canadian Jewish News and other publications numerous times. She is currently filming a documentary on Jewish diversity and is the host of the CJN podcast, Rivkush, which focuses on diversity, Israel, and Jewish topics. She's also the executive director of Bet Raim Synagogue and a board member of Adraba, Toronto's first 21st century Jewish high school. Welcome, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that wonderful welcome. Before I begin, I want to preface this by saying that while I am speaking about the Jewish history in Jamaica, I will absolutely 100% acknowledge I am by no means an expert on the topic. I enjoy the topic. I enjoy the topic around anything that has to do with the Caribbean and Jewish life. If you want to know more about what it's like to live in Jamaica as a Jew. I am not that person, but I can happily direct you to those who are experts on that. There is a lot of information on Jews in Jamaica and the Caribbean at our fingertips. My goal is to give you a taste of the wonderful, rich history of Jews in Jamaica, and hopefully that will encourage you to learn more about Jewish life in Jamaica, and hopefully it will encourage you to go to Jamaica. I'll tell you as an aside before I continue, one of my goals, which I hope will happen at some point, is I would love to have a Jewish tour, not just of Jamaica, because there are people who do that. What I would love to do is have kind of an island hopping Jewish tour of the Caribbean. That is ultimately my goal. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen and let's delve a little bit into the history of Jews in Jamaica. And Anne, can you give me a thumbs up to make sure that everyone can see that? I know I'm asking you to pop back in. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so Jews of Jamaica. The Jewish settlement in the Caribbean, which is something that when I mention this, people are surprised, because when we think of, Jews on this side of the world, we tend to think of like New York, Toronto, North America, and we don't realize that the actual Jewish settlement on this side of the world was in the Caribbean. It preceded Jewish settlement in North America. It was the first synagogue, the first cemetery was in the New World. Actually, for approximately 200 years, Jewish life in the New World was centered in the Caribbean, and the majority were Western Sephardim. In the 17th and 18th century, actually, there were more Jews in Curacao than New York, Newport, Philadelphia, and Savannah combined. And just wrap your mind around that, because I just mentioned previously, when we think of North America and we think of Jews, we think of the big centers, right? So just appreciate that there were more Jews in Curacao than in any of those places combined. As a matter of fact, the Caribbean was the source for much of the early Jewish migration to North America. And here's a really cool fact that I discovered as I was investigating everything Jewish in the Caribbean. There are two Jamaican Jews, Jacob and Joseph de Cordova, founded a newspaper, Waco, Texas, okay, in 1848, which is pretty cool to begin with. And they also established the newspaper, the Texas Herald. I don't know if it's still, Texas Herald is still, king, but that is pretty cool in my estimation. This is a picture, I'll get into this, but it kind of reminds me of the kippah that's sold at this wonderful place in Montego Bay, which I'll mention to you in a bit. So Jamaica's motto, out of many, one people. And I think just bear that in mind. The one thing I love about Jamaica, and what I'll tell you about myself is I fondly refer to myself as a Jafaican, because while my parents and my ancestry is Jamaica, my family is like there used to be this company called Benetton, and their motto was I think they still exist, I don't even know, but their motto was the United Colors of Benetton. And when I think of my family as a whole, we are this wonderful, multi-ethnic, just this hugely diverse family. And I also think, when I think of Jamaica, I also think of that, yet, I'll identify as Jamaican. And I can tell you too, when you're outside of Jamaica, the Jamaican diaspora, it's strong. So now, how did Jews get there? How did they get there? Well, unfortunately, throughout our history, we have a history of not being safe in the countries that we end up in. And Spain and Portugal were no different. So the Spanish Inquisition, which around 1478 to 1834, which actually coincidentally occurred the same month as the first Atlantic voyage of Christopher Columbus, and the Portuguese Inquisition and expulsion, 1536 and 1821, is what led people to the Caribbean. So we know to use, and I have this in quotation marks because Jamaica was discovered by Columbus in 1493 on the second voyage of the discovery. And the reason I put that in quotation marks is I always kind of, maybe it's a little facetious, but it was always there, but he discovered it. It became a private holding of the Columbus family starting around 1503. And by that, we mean that it was kind of bequeathed to them, so it was theirs. Columbus's grandson, however, he allowed conversos to settle on the island. And what was important to know is that while the Inquisition was happening in other colonies around the world, the Inquisition did not touch Jamaica. So there was an element of safety. While there may not necessarily have been the ability to openly practice as Jews, because that would still have been deemed illegal, there wasn't the danger of the Inquisition. And if any of you know about the Inquisition, it was absolutely horrific. So imagine the comfort of knowing that you were safe from that. So what happened though, now Jamaica is a Spanish colony, but what started to happen was around that area, there were still colonies and places that still had the Inquisition. And there started to become the threat of an Inquisition upon Jamaica. And you can appreciate Jews in particular would not want that to happen. So one of the things that had happened was they sent some correspondence to Oliver Cromwell and pretty much, for lack of a better word, made kind of a deal that if we kind of help out and secure the island for England, then will that guarantee our safety? And I'm saying that in a very paraphrased sort of way. Britain also hired buccaneers and privateers. So you could almost call it a state-sponsored piracy, and really worked hard. The pirates worked hard to shut off the shipping lanes to the Spanish people or the Spanish government, which makes it very challenging to continue your business. And the pirates kind of flourished. And as an aside, the pirates, because I know it was mentioned earlier, and I'll go a little bit more into pirates, but basically they operated out of Port Royal in Jamaica. And if you go there today, you will see remnants of what the pirates, the presence of the pirates. In fact, at Hunts Bay Cemetery, it contains the tombstones of various pirates. So nonetheless, they were successful, and England gained control of Jamaica. Once they were under British rule, things opened up a lot for Jews. So there was an increased Jewish immigration to Jamaica. Jews from other places were able to escape anti-Semitism and persecution and go to Jamaica. And because it was now a lot more open than it was under Spanish rule, synagogues were built, and the things that you can think of that you would associate with a Jewish community, religious activities, and all that started to really take hold and build traction, more involvement in the business world and everything. The first community was in Spanish Town, and I already had mentioned Port Royal, which was the haven for pirates and buccaneers. And I guess one way to phrase it is that the Jews in Jamaica enjoyed almost as much privilege as Christian whites. And I've made that distinction because while everything was great, not everything was perfect. By 1660, Jews in Jamaica did get full citizenship. I'm going to digress a little because I did mention the pirates, and there are two very famous pirates. One name I would think you would absolutely recognize is Sir Henry Morgan. And if you need some context, visualize a bottle of rum. And that who's who the rum is named for is Sir Henry Morgan. And the other name that you see there is Antonio Valles Enriquez, who changed his name to Abraham Enriquez Cohen. And he was, if by all accounts, he was an incredible pirate, but it just sounds like just an incredible person, generally speaking. And one of the things that he was famous for, along with a Dutch pirate who I think is almost legendary, and the two of them were instrumental in having the largest heist in at least the Spanish Armada's history. And the heist was about $1 billion US today. So it's pretty incredible. And there was a happy ending in that when Sir Henry Morgan became the lieutenant governor, he did not forget his friend and he pardoned him. And so the pirate Enriquez was actually never convicted for piracy or anything. And I would like to think helped establish Jamaica for the Spanish. So here's a couple of pictures, Sir Henry Morgan and Moses Cohen Enriquez. Sorry, yeah. All right, so I did digress because of the interest in pirates. And if you really want to know more about the Pirates of the Caribbean, because as much as I love the topic of the Pirates of the Caribbean, I am by no means an expert on it, but there is a fantastic book called The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. I highly recommend it because not only does it discuss the history of piracy and the throughout the Caribbean, it also gives a good history of Jewish life in the Caribbean, and not just Jamaica, but the various islands. So I would highly recommend that book. So going back to Jamaican politics, political rights. Now, I did mention that in 1660, they did receive full citizenship, the Jews on the island. However, you know, sometimes it seems like when things seem to be going okay, it's like another shoe drops, for lack of a better expression. And that shoe, so to speak, was something that I colloquially call the Jew tax. So this tax was levied on the Jewish citizens of Jamaica. And the rationale for it was that this tax would help fund the military. And, you know, we know that might sound great or sound whatever, but how could such a small percentage of a population be responsible for such a bigger tax burden than anybody else under the guise of the military? I would say that it was more shades of anti-Semitism more than anything else. Because of this, though, the leaders in the Jewish community did petition England and petitioned successfully to obtain, not only absolve this tax, but obtain full civil rights. Because while they were 1660 with citizenship, they really didn't have full civil rights. It still took a while to come, but I must say in 1831, the Jews of Jamaica had full civil rights. That is significant because then if you contrast it to the Jews in Canada, Jews in Canada didn't have full civil rights until 1832. Even more of a contrast is the Jews in the United Kingdom didn't get full civil rights to 1858. So Jamaican Jews obtained civil rights even before those Jews who lived in the country of which they were a colony of. Because of that, Jews in Jamaica became more involved in the politics. And by 1849, 8 of the 47 members of the House of Assembly were Jewish. By 1855, 13 of the 46 were Jewish. And the fact that I found absolutely fascinating was that they had closed on Yom Kippur. Slave trade. I've been asked about this, and my philosophy around the slave trade and acknowledging any Jewish participation is that we also sometimes you have to see history in the context of what it was. And we know that the slave trade was active in Jamaica. That is part of Jamaica's history. It is something that is a fact, and facts should be known. So part of that is also recognizing that, yes, there were Jews involved in the slave trade. In particular, in 1691, there was a Jew by the last name of Da Costa who had stock in the Royal Africa Company, which is a slave trade. In 1693, 11 shareholders were Jewish, 3.6%. Not a significant number, we're not talking 80%, we're not talking 50%, even 25%. But I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize that, yes, there was Jewish involvement in the slave trade in Jamaica. There are Jews involved also in building the Jewish economy. In the 17th and 18th century, they were very active in the sugar and the vanilla industries, had leading roles in foreign trade and shipping. Kingston itself is heavily influenced by Jewish builders. And I'll tell you a story. I did refer to myself as Jamaican because I wasn't born and raised in Jamaica. But for a significant part of my life, I would think from around 2 years old to probably 18, 19, I actually spent the month of August every single year in Jamaica. And, looking back, it was interesting that my parents always picked the hottest month because August in Jamaica is hot. It's hot. I spent a lot of time, part of my time was spent in Kingston, part of my time was spent on the North Coast around Runaway Bay, which is near Ocho Rios, between Montego Bay and Ocho Rios. As I got older and life interfered, I didn't go back to Jamaica as much. However, recently, by recently, I mean probably 7 years ago, now maybe, I took a trip to Jamaica because I was working on the documentary about Jewish diversity. So I wanted to capture the diversity in Jamaica. And I went with my equal other, who is from Israel. And interestingly enough, I found out he's in love with Jamaica. And he himself had been, I think, a couple of times at that point, and he knew it very well because I think at one point he spent a significant amount of time in Jamaica just exploring it and everything. So him and I, though, we went this time and we stayed in Montego Bay, and I needed to do some filming. So we hired a driver and we took the scenic route. And if anybody knows Jamaica, the scenic route from Montego Bay to Kingston is very, very long. We avoided the new highway that was built since I had been there last in my 20s. And we took the back roads, and it was very interesting. And what I didn't realize, though, was Yoram was really paying attention to not just the scenery, but the construction and the building. So we went to the synagogue, and we had a bit of a time finding it, which I found, because in my mind, it should have been a no-brainer. You know, I had the address and should have been a no-brainer to find it. But our driver, I kept saying, well, it's on this street. It's on this street. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, well, it's a synagogue. And he finally went, oh, the Jewish church. Okay, I know exactly where that is. So we got there, went on a wonderful tour of it, guided by Stephen Enriquez, who was absolutely amazing. And on our way back, I'll talk about my visit to the synagogue later on, but on our way back, finally, Yoram said something about like what he was thinking. And he said to me, he said, you know, I keep seeing this name everywhere. And he said, it's really a very Sephardi Jewish name. He said, it's Matalon. And I said, oh yeah. I said, from what I understand, I said, they're a significant family in Jamaica. And our driver said, oh yes. He said, they have contractors, so they build buildings and et cetera. He says, so you'll see their name everywhere. And our contractor said, oh, are they Jewish? And yeah. And that actually led to our driver, and that actually led to a wonderful conversation with our driver about not Jews and Jamaicans specifically, but about Judaism. So I think by the time we took the trip back, which was quite a few hours, the trip back to Montego Bay, he knew a lot about Judaism. And we also went to a restaurant so you could try some kind of Israeli food. But I digress. But I thought that was interesting that even, there are buildings like Devonshire House that was done by a Jewish architect, but we Jews continue to influence building in some ways or another. Let's go now to the 20th century. I find that when people talk about Jewish history, especially in our recent history in the 20th century, around the Holocaust, World War II, we talk about Europe, we talk about incidences that happened, but often the conversation does not turn to the efforts of the Caribbean, the efforts of Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in saving Jews from the Holocaust. You already heard that Jamaica was a haven for Jews escaping the Inquisition. Well, it was also a haven for Jews who were escaping Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. In fact, the history is something as Jews we should talk about, and we should be very proud of the efforts of Jamaica, because those of us from Canada and those of us from the United States, we know that we turned away Jews seeking refuge. We know the story of the St. Louis. We know that story. But how many of you know the story of the Serpa Pinto? How many of you know the story of Gibraltar, where Jews were able to find refuge? So I think that's a history that I encourage you to delve into more and to learn more about it. Here is a picture of the Serpa Pinto with some Jewish refugees on it. I searched the internet. The internet's a wonderful place. I searched the internet and actually found the letter that basically giving the full list of the passengers who are sailing from Jamaica, and it talks about one of the families. It gives the total number of families on that particular ship and say how some were Polish citizens, etc. And it was done in conjunction with, and I'm going to forget the name, but it's an American organization who helps with immigration. I cannot, for the life of me, forgive me, remember the name. It's American Joint Commission. regardless, it was done in tandem with the American organization and also the exiled Polish government to help some Polish Jews escape. So Gibraltar, here are some of the names of the people who were on that particular manifest headed to Jamaica. See quite a few people. And this is a picture of Gibraltar. So Gibraltar was initially established by the British, and their goal in building this camp was to save British civilians, in particular from Gibraltar, which was being threatened by the German army. Initially, it was built to house 6,000 people, but only a third of it was occupied. So therefore, they opened it up to Jewish refugees. All total, the numbers vary, as numbers tend to do sometimes. So I've seen everything from 800 to 1,400 to 1,800 Jewish refugees finding refuge there between 1942 and the end of the war. So it had synagogue, it had obviously places to sleep, full kitchen, activities to keep people occupied. There is a wonderful book called Recreation of a Dream, and it is a story of her story of being one of the refugees and being at Gibraltar. There are positives and negatives, as there would be with anything. I think what I have read, for example, some of the negatives were that some of the refugees were disheartened because, they wanted to stay and fight in the war effort against Nazi Germany, and there was those feelings. And I can't say this 100%, but you also kind of wonder if there wasn't feelings of, we wish more of us could be here, and why us, and who knows. But there wasn't all sunshine and roses. I mean, there was a war going on, and they were there to find safety. But definitely I would recommend that book. It is a good book to read about a person's experience in the camp. And here are some pictures, because and I can make this available to the organizers, the sources for this information, because this is where these wonderful photographs come from of the people who were there during the war. Synagogues. At one point, there were a lot of synagogues, and here are some of the synagogues that were present in Jamaica at various times. Unfortunately, some synagogues were destroyed by fire, and eventually we've gone from they've gone from a total of maybe 8 synagogues to 1. And actually the United Congregation of Israelites just recently in December celebrated 100 years of the amalgamation of the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi congregations. And that is the synagogue that I had gone to visit with Yoram. So again, as I mentioned, this was destroyed by fire in 1882. This is a picture I took, and it's not the best picture, I have to say, but when we did visit, it was in January. I think it was in January, and they were having the most incredible heat wave in Jamaica that actually topped all those August that I spent. I had never experienced such heat. And so I found it a challenge actually taking pictures because I was so hot. So it's kind of on an angle, and I probably should have edited it, but I don't think, even with the challenges of taking this picture, I think you can still see the beauty of this synagogue. there are many beautiful synagogues all around the world. And maybe I'm personally biased because, you know, my background is Jamaican, but I have to say this synagogue is gorgeous. And this is only one view of it. It's just beautiful. And part of the synagogue, they also have a museum attached to it. And the museum has some wonderful pictures, some documentation of the history of the Jewish community. And it is just, it's an amazing place. I could have literally stayed there all day. As I mentioned before, Stephen was there and telling me about the history. He told me, for example, we went up and looked in the Ark, and he told me that I think, and I can be, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he had said at the time there was 13 Torah scrolls. It was stunning, beautiful. I hope one day to go back and actually go to services there. So here are some pictures that I had found of the synagogue years ago. One of the things about the synagogue that is that it has sand floors. And people, I actually asked Stephen, you know, because I had heard about the history of sand floors, and you know, that I'd heard, for example, that it muffles the sound, and it's logical, right? It muffles the sound so that if you're forced to pray in secret, you can't be heard. A good thing about the sand is that you can remove all traces of people being there. But Stephen added a wonderful thing to it that made me laugh. And he said to me, he goes, but there's another reason, he said. And he said, this reason is quite interesting. He said, another reason for the sand is that the kids will play in it during services. And I was like, okay, that sounds all right. So I will never forget him saying that. So in my mind, I always have these 3 reasons for sand floors. Okay, so religiously, it was originally Orthodox. There weren't any synagogues between 1509 and 1655. And if you can remember what I had said, that was pretty much a period of when the Spanish were in control. So of course there wouldn't be any obvious signs of Judaism during that time. It wasn't until after, during the British rule, that synagogues were started to be built. And I also did mention to you that in 1921, it was the amalgamation of the 2 communities, and that it was recently, the 100 years was recently celebrated. During the 20th century, it has become more progressive. And in 1974, it officially changed by the board from orthodoxy. However, what was pointed out to me were 2 rules still remain intact, in that marriage and burials are Jewish only. Okay, so let's talk about Jamaica and Israel. Because one of the things that I noticed when I was there, and I think I do have a picture, is that there was this wonderful picture of Golda Meir and a letter she had written to the Jamaican community. And I smile when I think about Jamaica and Israel, because I'll tell you, I spent almost a year in Israel. And when people would say, well, what's your background? I'd say, you know, I'm Canadian, and I'm Canadian. And then and then it usually leads to, yeah, but, you know, where are your parents from? And I'll say, oh, my parents are from Jamaica. And their eyes would light up, because they'd say, oh, Jamaica, you mean Bob Marley, reggae, and it just the smiles on their faces of Israelis who would ask that. It's like this love affair with Israel. And it's funny because I did mention too that my equal other, he's Israeli, and he had been to Israel, you know, a few times unbeknownst to me, or to Jamaica, and he's absolutely in love with Jamaica. And I tried to think, you know, I thought Jamaica is actually a pretty good place if you're Israeli and you want to visit. Temperature's kind of the same. I think the atmosphere it feels I think there are similarities. Having, lived in Israel for a little bit and having, spent chunks of my childhood growing up in Jamaica, I can actually kind of see it. But Jamaica and Israel have a bond. Now, one thing that you may not know is sometimes it can be, my parents immigrated to Canada from Jamaica. My mom actually came in around 1960. And historically, Jamaicans have always had a challenge with visiting Canada. I don't know what it's like with visiting the United States, but for example, they were required to get a visa and before you could travel. So it wasn't like how Canadians we can just like zip over to Israel. We don't necessarily need a visa ahead of time. And one of the things that's really interesting is that a Jamaican can travel to Israel and they don't have to get a visa in advance. They can just go to Israel, which is more significant than it sounds. Here's a picture of Mr. Holness and Rabbi Rashkin, and they're at the hotel in Jamaica. The rabbi, there's a gold in my ear in the letter. I did take a picture of it. So Rabbi Raskin and I, when I went to Jamaica to do the documentary, I had heard that there was a Chabad. And so, of course, I'm like, okay, I must go to Chabad in Montego Bay. And I had the pleasure of meeting Rabbi Raskin. I think it's safe to say that he loves Jamaica. And so I asked him, and I actually did interview him. The next time I went to Jamaica after first meeting him, I did go back and I did interview him for my documentary. And I asked him, I said, first of all, I heard that Chabad would come and go. And he said, I said, why? What was it? And he said, well, actually, the challenge was kosher meat. And I said, well, that's interesting. And I said, well, how did you resolve it? He said, I have it sent in from Florida. It was an easy resolve. And then I also said to him, I said, but, you're in Montego Bay. How was it for you to link in with Jews around Montego Bay? And he did acknowledge that initially he wasn't sure if he'd be able to find many Jews in Montego Bay. And lo and behold, months later, he said they were coming to him and there is a community. And I said, there you go. But what he also does is he will have Shabbat dinners, if you're visiting Jamaica, you can go to, if you're in a hotel, you can have Shabbat dinner with Rabbi Raskin. And he has this wonderful place called Chabad Hotspot. And I have a picture of myself and Yoram at Chabad Hotspot. This place is amazing. I think the best way I can describe it, it's kind of like it's Israeli/Jewish food with the spice of Jamaica. So for example, there's jerk falafel. And I'll tell you, my Israeli is quite particular about falafel, hummus, etc. He likes the falafel at Chabad Hotspot. Great place, highly recommend it, beautiful. So where are we today? So the Caribbean countries, these numbers, if you research it, you'll find various numbers is par for the course. So this is the latest that I could find in how active the communities are. And as you can see, not as it used to be. Jamaica, that number, and I would lean towards those who live in Jamaica and are part of the Jewish community. And I keep meaning to reach out and find the actual numbers or what's perceived, because I've heard everything from 200 to 450 to 500, who knows? So, but as you can see, I think the main point is that it has gone down. And I think, it goes to my tour again. I'd love to still have a tour, because while there may not be, there's still some beautiful beautiful things that we can find in all these islands that tie directly into our Jewish history. So as I said, like 200 to 450, who knows? I found a statistic once that said there's a possibility that upwards to 400 and something thousand Jamaicans possibly have Jewish ancestry. I'm not saying are Jewish, but have Jewish ancestry. One game that I will sometimes play is I'll play, we all love our Jewish geography, right? So there are some common Jewish surnames in Jamaica, and we have Enriquez, we have Lindo, we have Sangster. And whenever I hear those names, I think, I wonder if they're Jamaican Jews or if they have Jamaican Jewish ancestry. So there's an actor, for example, his name is Delroy Lindo. And every time I hear his name, I don't actually think about his movies or his television shows. I always think, I wonder if he has any Jewish ancestry. That's, I guess, part of playing, Jewish geography on a different scale. In the Jewish community in Jamaica, previously, there was over 21 cemeteries. And I know a few years ago, and I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know if it continues, but I know at one point, Ainsley Enriquez and Rachel Franklin were doing some good work around cataloging and really doing a lot of work around the cemeteries. And because I remember at one point, I actually was going to join a group that was going to help clean up the cemeteries and restore them. Previously, there were 8 synagogues. Now there's 1. And I mentioned Chabad Hotspot. This is Chabad Hotspot. It has the best location. That's Rabbi Raskin that you see on the left, and Yoram and myself. And one really good thing about what had happened when we visited, Yoram hadn't put on tefillin since he was a bar mitzvah. And Rabbi Raskin, there's the result. So that was the first time he had put on tefillin since his bar mitzvah. I will not say how many years ago, but you can appreciate it was a while. And talk about a beautiful setting. That picture actually became the picture of the day on Chabad Hotspot's Facebook. It's beautiful. I took some pictures while I was there because at the synagogue, because again, I would so encourage, if you're making a trip to Jamaica or just deliberately make a trip to Jamaica, and definitely connect with the Jewish community there, definitely go to the synagogue and the museum. This is in the Memorial Gardens. It's just beautiful. I took a picture of the cemetery, and that's all she wrote. I want to thank you. Again, I'm happy to provide further references, further information for you to connect with the community in Jamaica if you want to learn more about it. And stay tuned. Maybe one day I will have that Jewish tour of the Caribbean.
Thank you, Rivka. Thank you so much. On behalf of Alan, myself, Congregation BINA, and all our supporting organizations and those on the webinar this evening with us, I wish to say thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be with us here this evening. We have learned so much about the rich history of the Caribbean Jews, their horrible expulsion from Spain to their settling in a faraway land and building a new life for themselves there. I know there is much more for us to still learn about Jewish life in Jamaica for the past 350 years. And we can't encapsulate 350 years in a 40 or 45-minute speech, okay, or presentation. But hopefully, Alan and I are hoping that we will have other opportunities to do so. Okay, I'm sad to know that Jews had to fight so hard to be granted citizenship in so many countries around the world. The committee you were talking about, that was the American Joint Distribution Committee. Okay, that's whom you were thinking of. With regards to sand floors, it brought back memories because I did attend a bar mitzvah in St. Thomas at the cemetery there, and it has sand floors. A synagogue, sorry, I'm sorry. We did attend a bar mitzvah at a synagogue in St. Thomas. And I've learned subsequently that many of the islands have synagogues with sand floors. St. Thomas, I know Barbados has, I know Curacao has, Suriname, many. I haven't been to all of them. I've been to several, but not all, and I've missed Jamaica. Moving on to our Q&A, I have to say that the people on the chat are very knowledgeable about a lot of things concerning the Jews in Jamaica. And there are many questions, there are many comments. Okay, to summarize some of the comments, I know that they said that someone said Rabbi Raskin now has a shochet who comes and slaughters meat. Okay, so no longer they have to import kosher meat. Okay, I think that is great. Okay, someone said that there was a lot of integration and intermarriages in Jamaica. I think that happened in many parts of the world. Many books have been mentioned, okay, in the chat. I was trying to keep track of them all, and it's really hard. One was on the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean, another one, the Jews of 18th century Jamaica, a testamentary history of a diasporan transition by Stanley Mervis. That's another book that was mentioned. A question that came for you.
Sure. So before I address that, what we can offer possibly, and because I have a bibliography of books about Jews of the Caribbean and Jamaica and so on, and maybe combined with the books that were suggested, we can make that available to people. And one thing that I did neglect to do, because there has been within the community, from what I understand, one of the things that I'm really grateful for, and which really allows us to even know the history, is the work of the Jamaican Jews in holding that history and making sure it doesn't get lost, because we know it's gotten lost in other countries. And in particular, I have to thank the Enriquez family, because they have held down that community and have been pillars of that community and made sure that people knew outside of Jamaica about the Jews in Jamaica. So I have to give them a shout out for, because that is key, so that people like me, people like Yoram, people like whomever have somewhere that they can visit, they can see.
Correct. Also, so just to tie into what you just said, Ainsley Cohen Enriquez has been in touch with us, and he was the past president at one of the synagogues over there, and has done a lot of research on the Jews of Jamaica. And I'm hoping that he will get in touch with us. I know he's on the webinar today. He is listening in. And Ainsley, I hope you will get in touch with Alan and myself. We would love to talk to you on Zoom. And perhaps based on a lot of comments that came in, one of the questions that was posed in the comments was, why did nobody reach out to someone in the Jewish community in Jamaica? The reason Alan and I didn't is because we didn't know anyone to reach out to. So what I'm going to say to all of you who are part of this presentation, are listening in, if you know of people like, Ainsley Enrique, if you could get in touch with us, you have the Congregation BINA email link, get in touch with me. I will respond to you, and I would appreciate, and Alan would appreciate, any suggestions you may have for speakers, particularly speakers who've grown up in those Sephardic communities. Makes a big difference. Okay, I know that. And it would be nice to learn about the religious practices, how they were practiced. It would be nice to learn about the Jewish foods. Well, what sorts of Jewish foods existed there? How did holidays get, celebrated? Because every community in the diaspora has a little different way of doing these things. And it is really interesting for us to learn that. And so to all of you out there, I'm going to say this: Alan and I are going to do our best to see if we can get someone like Ainsley Cohen-Henry to do a presentation for us from the point of view of someone who was born, grew up there, and is still living there. Makes a huge difference because the perspective is very different. So we would love to do something like that. And we hope that you will all join us when we do, even though you seem to know so much about the Jews in all these lands. Another thing that came through in the comments that I found here was, what do the people in Jamaica, do in terms of the Jewish rites and traditions and things like that? And hopefully someone who's grown up there and is familiar being head of a synagogue would be able to tell us what the similarities or differences are between the way they did things there and the way other Jewish communities do things, or the way we do it in North America, for example. Okay, now here's something else that would be of interest to you and to all of us. There's an Irene Angelica who said that there is a film, a feature film being produced right now, Reaching for Zion, and it is filmed in Jamaica and Israel, which they will be releasing later this year. And I know that in the chat, Alan wrote to you, Irene, asking you to get in touch with us. We would love to know more about the film that you are releasing, and we would love to see the film at some point too, because it does mean a lot. And perhaps we could share that information with a lot of people who are interested in knowing more about that. Okay.
So Anne, I just want to thank you for saying that, because I had done this presentation at the JCC, and there was somebody in the audience who was smiling and nodding, and I had practiced my fake Jamaican patois, and he smiled even more. And afterwards I went up to him and I said, "You're Jamaican?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said to me, he said, "I was actually born and raised Jewish Jamaican in the community." And I said to him, I said, "Well, how did I do?" He goes, "Not bad." I said, "That was important for me to know." I said, "Because I am not speaking from the perspective of a Jewish Jamaican born and raised." And I said, and he agreed. He said, "My experience is different." And I said, his experience needs to be shared. Like you had said, the experience of those in the community needs to be shared.
Yes, it really does. Here's another question. What are the main sources on Henry Morgan's Jewishness?
I answered that. I didn't make that clear. Henry Morgan is not Jewish.
He's not
He's
Jewish.
just the rum guy.
Okay. He was a pirate, and he was a
pirate and a good friend of the Jewish pirate. So and he was kind of like the pirate's pirate. So his name always comes in conjunction when you talk about the Jewish pirates. You cannot not mention the man on the rum bottle, but he is not Jewish.
Okay, someone here says, my cousin Wilfred Lindo has the lecture about growing up in Jamaica.
That's who I was actually speaking about. It was Willie Lindo who I spoke to. Wonderful man.
He's excellent. He lives in Toronto now.
Yes, he does.
So that's another, resource that we have if we want to explore further into the community.
Absolutely. He's a wonderful man.
Okay. So I'm going to thank everyone for all your comments, your feedback. I tried to make a note of as much as I could. And perhaps now that we have heard of like Willie Lindo and also of Enrique in Jamaica, perhaps we could get something going that more people would be receptive to as well. And I'm thrilled at the interest and the enthusiasm of people here. And above all, the fact that many of them said they would love to do the island hopping. Okay.
My ultimate dream. Once my documentary is finished.
Your ultimate dream of organizing a Jewish tour to the islands, to see the synagogues and to meet the communities there that are still there would be wonderful. Okay, so I want to give you a heads up on that. That's a good idea. Keep it going. Okay. I would love to also tell you how much we admire and appreciate the necessary work you are doing in the area of Jewish diversity. It is long overdue. As an immigrant to Canada 55 years ago, it was an uphill battle to get Jews of India recognized as Jews and equal within the wider Jewish community here. But we persevered and we've made it. So we look forward to seeing the film on Jewish diversity that you are filming. So please let us know when it is released. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much and thank you to all of you for attending tonight's presentation. From now on, the Sephardi Mizrahi Jewish Speaker Series will work to have a speaker every 2 months, not every month, like Alan and I were doing last spring and last summer. That was too hectic for us. And we would love to do it every other month. So we have time to prepare. So we look forward to seeing you in March. The speaker and the topic and the date will be announced later in February or early March. Please join us then for our next presentation too. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy. Shalom and good night, everyone.